Hey, how's it going? If we want our species to create a worthwhile future, it's probably a good idea to understand what it is that we actually want and what it is that we don't want. Our culture has helpfully distilled what we don't want, the range of bad human behaviour, down into a term that we know as evil. But what is evil? Because knowing what it is might help us conquer it. Let's talk about it. So human beings have both a breathtaking capacity for empathy, as well as, in some cases, a troubling ease with cruelty. And the term evil is a shorthand for this dark underbelly of human behaviour, but it's not all that obvious what that term actually refers to. Is evil something that's out there in the universe that causes this behaviour? Is it some metaphysical force? Is it a psychological pathology? What actually is it? I think a good place to start is looking at the cultural lenses through which the idea of evil has been interpreted, because as with many philosophical ideas, in my view, there seems to be a kind of a broad Western approach to looking at things, coming about in large part due to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and then a broad Eastern approach, more in line with Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism. In regards to philosophical ideas, I tend to think that the Eastern view, as a generalized whole, tends to be closer to representing reality correctly, just in my opinion, although there are interesting insights all over the place. Like, as a non-religious person, I'd still like to see if there are any diamonds in the rough when it comes to that sort of stuff. It'd almost be more impressive if a tradition with thousands of years of history has absolutely no interesting perspectives on anything. So I'll start with the West. In the West, evil is kind of like a cosmic antagonist. The Western psyche has been shaped by narratives in which good and evil are forces locked in duality with each other. Human beings are thought of like we're in the middle of this struggle, and we get this thing called free will, and we can do what we like with it. We should move towards the good, but we're perpetually tempted towards the bad end, but then you're judged for doing so. Like in Christianity, there's the concept of sin, which are basically actions that distance yourself from God and goodness as a whole. The concepts of heaven and hell really are more like being closer to or further away from God, rather than, heavenly palaces and fire and brimstone, respectively. This sort of battle between light and darkness archetype has bled massively into culture. A lot of our stories literally color code the good guys and the bad guys. Now that helps us tell certain stories, but in other ways it's fucking asinine, and it makes us less inclined to actually understand the mechanisms by which human behavior operates when we think about people as plainly good or bad, or even as a collection of opinions which are themselves good or bad. I don't think that's how people's minds actually work. Eastern traditions offer a different model, one that, at least to my knowledge, is better described as wisdom versus ignorance. So the destructive actions of human beings arise not from some allegiance to the grand cosmic adversary, but from delusion. It's from people fundamentally just misunderstanding how reality works. Evil, to the extent that the term really makes sense, refers to the behavioral consequences of doing something in an unexamined way. Something slightly hard for people to grasp is that there are objective truths about subjective experience. I think that's an important insight. Again, this is all just my opinion, but like, if you burn your hand, you suffer, right? Like, that's true, that's a fact. It's objectively true, even though that's a fact about the contents of someone's consciousness, which is typically what we would call subjective. What I'm saying is that it's objectively true that performing some action might needlessly cause suffering for other beings which are truly conscious. And if you assume this is a non-complicated scenario, so like there's no expectation of long-term well-being for everyone at the price of short-term suffering, and also assuming that you agree that suffering is actually fundamentally a negative thing, which is oddly hard to prove, but just put that aside for the sake of this conversation. In a nutshell, assuming that you agree with and you know all of the above, you won't do things that cause other beings to suffer, or at least you won't do so needlessly. You won't go out of your way to do psychopathically horrible things to other people just for your own amusement. Now, you are still likely to be selfish, to do things that will disproportionately benefit you, or maybe even somewhat harm others if you stand to gain from something, to a degree, but it's kind of an obvious character flaw in yourself that you'll want to improve just of your own accord. Like, in my view, I suppose my attitude to the way life is meant to be lived is, I want to say that you should be in harmony with reality, but that sounds a bit too floaty and imprecise for my liking. What I mean is that I think you shouldn't live as if something is true when it isn't. You should act in accordance with reality, not selectively ignoring parts of reality that aren't convenient. So that's why I broadly reject the notion of evil as we typically understand it, and I put ignorance in its place. People act harmfully when they fail to understand and act in accordance with reality. Sorry to interrupt, this is just a quick message to say, statistically speaking, you're probably not subscribed, so I'll make you a deal. Press the subscribe button and I won't come over to your house and do this. Alright, thanks, back to the video. most of what most of us typically call evil is mostly misunderstanding. Although I am saying this, there are individuals who are just, for the lack of a better term, evil. You know, people who are just absolutely fucking psychotic. They do exist. People who'll, turn on Justin Bieber and then drive into an orphanage. Truly malevolent people are rare, but they do exist. And on one level, I think you can call them evil, but simultaneously, on a deeper level, the fact that they're so fucked in their head kind of isn't their fault. Like, no one chooses their own neurochemistry. The obvious example of this was the University of Texas shooting, where a guy killed 15 people, and then the killer got shot and killed, and in his post-mortem, they found a tumor in his brain which was pressing on certain areas which could have been responsible for him doing the things that he did. Then again, in the case of literally anyone, you could argue that we ultimately don't choose our neuronal structure, and if we understood the brain fully, we could probably cure people of their psychopathy, or their anger issues, or their bloodlust, or whatever it is. You just rearrange a few million synapses and hey presto, they're basically a different person. But is that what we usually think of when we say evil? Do we think of it as like a disease that's dangerous but is ultimately curable with sufficiently advanced medical technology? Some people actually make the argument against the death penalty on this basis, but then again, if we don't actually have the technology to cure a serial killer right now, does that argument actually hold water? If, in practice, they are going to be dangerous forever, is it not still better to not waste taxes keeping them alive and instead just remove them from the gene pool and be done with it? All of this is not to say that I'm pro or against the death penalty, I just think there's more to it than this argument. But if we did have the tech to fix the quote-unquote evil people, I think we probably would be morally obligated to do so rather than RKO them into the shadow realm. But crazies like that are such a minority of what we usually call evil. The majority of evil perpetrated in the world is actually just normal people adhering to bad principles and ideas, ones which breed ignorance of the suffering they produce, and they usually believe that ignorance itself is some kind of virtue. Basically all the ways in which people inflict mass suffering upon themselves and one another, as well as how they inadvertently end up maximizing potential suffering of the future, are through means like this. Now I've had a think and I've tried to categorize this into a few groups of general behaviors, although I'm pretty sure this list is very non-exhaustive, but I'd say the usual suspects tend to be dogmatism, tribalism, and anti-intellectualism. So let's run through them real quick. So dogmatism is saying, we do things this way, and we do it this way just because, we're doing it this way. This is the right way, and it must be right because that's the way we're doing it. Right off the bat, obviously, religion has a lot to answer for on this one. When something in religion outwardly and unapologetically doesn't make any sense, religious people will tend to use the term having faith, which in my mind is just trying to put a positive spin on having absolutely no good logical or empirical reason to believe a claim being made about how reality supposedly works. Of course, it's not just religion though. Basically any collection of people can do this. In particular, politics does the shit out of this. In fact, that also kind of bleeds into tribalism. Tribalism is dogmatically aligning yourself with some particular group. Now, there are certain things that humans do that seem kind of similar and that do make some amount of sense, like having a close circle of people that you really care about, but the level of fucks given decrease as you think about people in a different family or in a different town or in a different country or whatever. From a survival perspective, that makes sense because you need to care about the people closest, but we do live in a global civilization and there's no reason to maximize suffering for everyone that isn't you. But tribalism is believing that you and your group are genuinely more worthy of well-being than the other conscious beings that exist, which, if they are similarly conscious to you, surely they're equally worthy of not suffering, right? There is a lot of tribalism going around at the moment in the form of, like nationalism or whatever. People who are unironically proud of themselves for being born on a particular patch of the floor with an imaginary outline drawn around it. Just to be clear, what I'm saying here is separate from a claim about whether one culture is better than another or whatever, which I think can be true, or at least if you isolate individual aspects of it. Like, just imagine the culture that you're currently in, and now imagine an identical culture, except 50% of the newborns get randomly selected to get immersed in molten cheese until they're dead, right? That one would clearly be worse than the one that you currently live in terms of just a sheer maximizing well-being perspective, unless you live somewhere where more than 50% of the babies are already getting dipped in cheese, in which case where the hell do you live? The last of the points I was going to bring up is anti-intellectualism, which is another variant of stupidity that's on the rise right now, presumably because the existence of social media makes everyone think their opinions are worth screaming into the void. Don't you just say your opinions on the internet? Shut the f***. So I swear to God, if I had a penny for every idiotic idea I've had explained to me by someone with no understanding of the relevant subject, but who justifies their literally just blatantly uneducated gobbledygook by saying, oh, it's just common sense, I'd have enough money to develop a mind control vaccine that raises your fucking IQ. Like, you can disagree with the scientific consensus if you want to. Seriously, you want to believe the Earth is flat or that evolution never happened or whatever. Seriously, be my guest. But clearly, if someone doesn't believe in evolution because they think that evolution means that at some point in history a monkey gave birth to a human man, that person is clearly not in a position to be dictating their strong opinions to everybody else, right? Like, the mainstream position that they think is stupid is also a position that they clearly don't actually understand. And that's not that controversial of a statement for evolution, but when it comes to something that's been hyper-politicized, like fucking climate change or whatever, again, fine. If you want to not believe the mountain of evidence indicating that a thing is happening, be my guest. Seriously. Like, the question things, I think you should make up your own mind. It's just that if you can't read the first page of an average scientific paper on the subject that you disagree with and accurately explain to me what all the words mean, I'm sorry, your opinion's about as useful to society as an ejection seat on a helicopter. Alright, I'm having a certified we live in a society moment, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this puppy up. So, what is evil? Well, some people are truly malevolent, but I'd say that the overwhelming majority of pain and suffering inflicted on humans isn't by some mystical evil force, it's just poorly thought out ideas. Maybe with a sprinkle of generic human selfishness on top. Alright, as always, a big thanks to my elite level supporters. Thunderbolt22A10, who was nice enough to pose as the thumbnail for this episode, Nomad Greg, whose body odor was described as three-dimensional in GQ magazine, Andrew Maul, who uses a parasitic alien as a pancreas, John Bejarano, who has the world's most opinionated opinions, JDK, who's a 9.5 right now on a scale from 9 to 10, Mutantious Doom, who's known for picking all the apples off of the tree and then eating the tree, Stormester Ritter, who can produce the Aurora Borealis by thinking about eels, Nikita Lurie, who's got a wooden leg and a real foot, Aaron Rowe, whose face is on the back of his head, but lucky for him, his head is also on backwards, and thanks to all my other supporters too. Don't forget to join the Patreon or the channel membership if you want to be featured in my video credits or chat on Discord, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Over and out.